Isaac Asimov was born October 4th, 1919, and January 2nd, 1920. The reason for this huge gap was because he was born in a different country, in Russia actually, in the city of Petrovichi. He was around the mid-1900s for most of his life. He is best known in chemistry actually for science fiction and popular science books, aka sci-fi. The reason he actually ended up migrating away from Russia, the reason we don't have, records of his birth, is because of discrimination, because he was an Orthodox Jew. Asimov has actually ran over 500 books. Most of his books are actually popular science books, explain scientific concepts in like a more historical way. That means basically from the most complex to the simplest form of the question. He wants to basically tell you from beginning to end how the concept was simple at one time, but then it became more complex. He likes to make it in a way that people understand it, So most of his books often provide also like birth and death dates for scientists, he also mentions too. So it gives a very descriptive way of how he explains science in his books. Along with like pronunciation guides for technical terms like chemistry itself, like the way it's pronounced and like how to explain what it is. It's actually very helpful to modern textbooks today. Some examples of his works are A Guide to Science, and also a 3-volume set of this thing called Understanding Physics, a book that he also wrote about himself, which is kind of narcissistic, but hey, he's an author, he can do what he wants. It's called Asimov's Chronological Science and Discovery. He also did more works that involved astronomy, mathematics, even some writings of Shakespeare, the Bible, and of course, chemistry. So enough about his books. Let's actually talk about Asimov's childhood. As a child, when he came to the U.S., he actually ended up working in a chain of candy shops that his family owned. But he was never really interested in that. His father really didn't approve of what he wanted to do, because Asimov was actually interested in reading like science magazines. Anything with the word science in the title, he was interested in, because it just kind of drew him in. He didn't want to go into the family business, which is why his father didn't approve. But later on, his father was persuaded into it and ended up accepting his son for who he was. So his childhood ended up obviously having an influence on what he wanted to do later in life. So he ended up majoring in biochemistry, but later became a writer. And I'll tell you why. He graduated at age 15, which is extremely young, from high school. And now that he was away from his family, he ended up attending Seth Low Junior College, which is like an extension program at the University of Columbia. This program was specifically designed for immigrants only, because immigrants during the time weren't seen as important as regular U.S. citizens. Now, the junior college ended up closing, but he continued to get his degree anyway. He got his BS degree at the university's extension at Columbia. So, after he got his BS degree at the university's extension at Columbia, he ended up wanting to go to medical school. So he applied to every medical school he can, but he couldn't end up getting in, which is kind of sad. But instead, he ended up getting his MA degree in chemistry and his PhD in biochemistry at the same university at Columbia in Brooklyn. Later on, once the draft started during the Vietnam War, he ended up going during the draft, and using his amazing typing skills, he was promoted as colonel in the U.S. Army. Once he came back, life was back to normal. He ended up coming back to get actually a job at the Boston University School of Medicine. Since his essays were so amazing that he wrote at his job at the facility, he actually was promoted to head of biochemistry. But he didn't take this promotion. You wonder why? I'll tell you. He ended up turning down the offer to become a full-time author and writer. So this is where his writing career actually took off. So Isaac Asimov has taught us about his books, his works, his writings, and his life. As a result of this, he's actually taught us how to make the modern textbook. The way that science books and chemistry books are written today is because of Isaac Asimov. What this will lead to is how they are written later on, and how we can improve from it and explain it in a simpler way, because science can be so complex for the young mind that it can help younger generations to learn the knowledge needed to move on in this spacey age. So this is what an attire of what Isaac Asimov might have looked like. He was the guy with like a tie and everything, like a bow tie, and all this stuff. He's kind of a nerdy dude, but hey, he was one of the greater minds of the world, and he ended up changing the way that we look at science and chemistry forever. This concludes my project on Isaac Asimov.